Hello, Internet. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Webby Session, Focus on Podcasting with Dan Taberski. I'm Nick Borenstein, General Manager of the Webby Awards, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our inaugural Webby Session, which is the first of a series that's long been in the works. At the Webby Awards, we honor the best and brightest makers online across a wide range of industries. That includes everything from advertising, video and film, social media, AI, apps and software, games, creators, and yes, of course, podcasts. The Webby Session series is designed to create conversation with some of the most innovative makers across the fields that we honor. We want to hear about their creative process, their award-winning work, and their visions for the future of their medium. So it feels especially fitting to kick off this year with a conversation about podcasting, a medium that continues to evolve and has been making headlines over the past several months. And there's no one better suited to talk about audio storytelling than Dan Taberski. Dan is a Webby Award-winning podcaster, writer, and director behind acclaimed limited-run documentary podcast series like Hysterical, which is produced with Wondery and Pineapple Street Studios, and named Apple Podcasts 2024 Show of the Year. No big deal. Dan and I go way back, however. We worked together on his very first podcast series, which was 2017's Missing Richard Simmons, a breakout hit that garnered millions of downloads and was later named by Vulture as one of the 10 nonfiction podcasts that changed everything. Now, alongside that, his other award-winning series like Surviving Y2K, Running from the Cops, and 9/12 have cemented Dan as one of the most distinctive and lauded audio documentarians working today. He's built a career crafting narrative nonfiction layered with empathy, curiosity, humor, and a voice that is uniquely his own. We'll drop some of those shows in the chat as well, so take a listen. We know you'll love them as much as we do. But today we'll dive into Dan's extraordinary career in audio storytelling and his background as a true multi-platform creator. From his South by Southwest jury prize-winning documentary short, These Cocksucking Tears, to his work in television as the creator of Cartoon Network's Destroy, Build, Destroy, to crafting a competition show called Craft Corner Deathmatch. And lest we forget his work as a field producer for The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, Dan's career is endlessly inspiring. So, of course, if you have any questions for Dan or his work, please do feel free to drop them in the chat during this conversation. We'll save some time at the end for questions. Now, if you are making great work in audio, yes, you, I encourage you to submit your work for this year's Webby Awards. Our extended entry deadline is next Friday, February 7th, and we've introduced new and expanded honors for both established and independent audio creators. That includes recognitions for shows, limited series and specials, individual episodes across categories like comedy, crime and justice, interview and talk show, scripted, history, and so much more. You can submit at the Webby Awards at our website, which is webbyawards.com. We will also drop the link of the website where you can apply and learn more in the chat. So now, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panelist, visionary podcast writer, host, and my friend, Dan Taberski. Hi, Dan.
Hi, what's going on?
You're here.
I'm here. I made it.
I'm so happy you're here. This is a treat. You know, I just gave a bunch of sort of career retrospectives for you, but it is true that your career spans so many pockets. I mean, it's filmmaking, it's writing, it's audio, it's television. I'm curious, though, how you found yourself drawn to audio as a medium. I mean, how did that medium sort of shape your creative voice?
I mean, I was drawn to it because it came up as a possibility. That I was working on a project about Richard Simmons, and now he had sort of disappeared, and trying to figure out what was going on with that. And I knew him and I knew all the people. And so I was trying to make a documentary film about it. And I was recording stuff. But you know, that process takes a long time. And then it was suggested by you guys that maybe audio would be a better, more sort of immediate, more intimate way of telling the story, which hadn't really occurred to me, but I was totally open to it. And we developed both a film and a podcast in tandem, and the podcast is the thing that the audio is the thing that seemed to work. It just seemed to work for me too. I wanted to be making things that were, I had been working in television for so long, and I wanted to I wanted to do film. And so I was trying to just be a director and make documentaries where it really was my voice that was crafting, that was my voice. I had something to say, and this documentary is about that. It's my vision, which is a hard thing to do. And so when audio came up as a possibility, it just really worked because there's a host, and the host needs to sort of present their vision and talk and explain why they're interested in normally a very casual way. And it just really ended up suiting me personally. Yeah. The way I talk on the shows I make is pretty similar to the ways I talk in real life. And so it worked for me.
And by the way, that is, I think, something that's so special about your shows, because it feels so personal. There's an intimacy to it. And, you know, folks online, I can tell you that is Dan, you know, knowing the sort of spirit of your work, it's felt in your shows. I'm curious, was it with Richard Simmons, or did it happen later, or has it even happened where you felt like, oh yeah, this being audio storytelling is really what I meant to do, or this sort of format was sort of the best expression for the storytelling that I enjoy doing?
I don't know that I've ever said that to myself, that like, oh, right, this is it. This is it for now. This is what works now. And I don't mean that as a sort of temporary, whatever, it doesn't really matter, whatever comes next. And I will say, I will say it's important for me to note, like, I don't treat podcasting as a way to sort of create IP for something else that I really want to do. Like, I really want to make that TV show, and this podcast is just going to be my way to get that. Or like the movie, like that's not what I'm doing. The podcasts are the podcasts. These are the things we're making. 6 episodes, 7 episodes. It's about 3 or 4 hours of documentary on a subject, and so that is what works now. I mean, there wasn't even podcasting when I graduated from high school. There was no such thing, and so. It's exciting. So I wouldn't limit myself to saying, oh, this is what I was here for, because who knows, tomorrow it might be like storytelling on jetpacks or something. Like, I don't know. But right now, like, this is what I really feel. And I really feel like that I've evolved into that idea that it's about being sort of platform, or not agnostic, but just like really exploring like writing, film, visual, audio, like books, just read books upon books upon books. Like, it's a great it's just a great lifestyle, not to mention a job.
Yeah. Well, you know, you have done so much great documentary storytelling, but also whether it was, you know, producing with Jon Stewart or sort of the multitude of work that you do, you feel like that sort of positioned you uniquely, or created sort of certain opportunities for you in audio that maybe were important to your process? You know, the ability to have sort of come up through television and film. How did you adapt sort of your storytelling to audio?
Well, I came up producing and writing in TV, and I was writing for a lot of comics. I was producing for The Daily Show for a while, but then I worked with Joan Rivers and Graham Norton and like Stephen Colbert and all these really fun, interesting people, and I would help write for them, and I would, even more importantly, is I would produce for them. And so like if we were doing like a 3-minute piece with Stephen Colbert, I would have to scratch track what we had written for him, or what he had written for himself, or what we thought he was going to say. And so there's 2 ways you can scratch track. You can either totally phone it in because you know you're not going to be good, and you just read it like, really, because I don't want to pretend that I know how to do what Stephen Colbert does. Or you try to do it. And you try to do like Stephen Colbert does it, and like, because it'll sort of give you a sense of maybe what you're going for, and it helps to sort of shed that embarrassment of like, obviously I'm not Stephen Colbert, but spending all those years writing for other people and fake performing how they would say those things was actually really helpful. That when finally someone's like, oh, you should write for yourself, I was like, oh, I know how to do that. I can do that. So that was really helpful in my career. That really set me up well.
Yeah.
Well, then the rest, I mean, I had to like, it didn't come easy. You just have to like, I was working in television. I decided I wanted to make film, and so I made a short, and it was hard, and it takes a really long time, and you end up spending some of your own money, and you're raising other money, but like that, the tenacity to do that, even though it takes forever, and even though it's taking you away from other things, and even though it prevents you from earning even more than you would like to earn in your regular life or whatever, it really helped me. Like, I got into film festivals, and so then you would go to film festivals and you'd like meet other people, and they'd be like, "You're a filmmaker." I was like, "I guess I am." And so there's a way where you really like create the own reality. I was a filmmaker because I made this film, and now we were showing it at festivals, and then you sort of realize, oh, that's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can do that, and it's the same thing with a podcast. Like, you can do that. You just have to do it. You just have to do it on your own. You just have to figure out how to get it done. That's the hard part.
Well, and I remember that being a lot of the conversations we had around Missing Richard Simmons. You know, I remembered, and you'll have to sort of help me understand sort of how you felt about the audio idea of it. But I remembered also this promise of, well, we can just make it. You know, the ability to be able to tell this story in audio allows us the ability to execute in a way that filmed media just takes so much longer. And I remember that feeling so incredible, that sort of agency. But I am curious, you know, were you excited by the idea of exploring it as a podcast?
I was excited as I was making it. I was excited. I mean, it didn't occur to me that would be a way to make a living afterwards. But
Yeah.
and I actually don't even think about it that way. It occurred to me that it would be something else, just like film.
Yeah.
Like, when you have a big idea and you got 5 years to try to make it happen, and you putter down the trail of like getting people to listen to your idea and raising a little bit of money and shooting some stuff, and like, it's the same thing. It's the same thing, the types of podcasts I make, and it's the same thing as making film. And so the process was really different. So it wasn't like, oh, it's this whole new thing. It was like, oh, this is really actually quite similar in terms of the type of life I was trying to set up for myself. And like, this totally fits into it, like project based. Yeah. Here's what I'm interested in, getting people excited about it, doing it whether people are on board or not. Mm-hmm. Like, just like it really fit what I was trying to do.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the beauty of audio as well is the distribution, you know, the ability to sort of get it out pretty seamlessly for a lot of people to engage with. And guess what? That's what happened with your amazing stuff, Missing Richard Simmons.
Which is that was a total surprise. Like, when you say, like, was I excited to be exploring it in audio? Like, yeah, I was, because I had questions and I wanted answers, and it was a real emotional, creative process. But like, I didn't think anybody was going to listen to it. And people say that as a joke, but it's really what it was. I mean, there was no idea of a breakout podcast besides Serial. And I don't even know, or maybe there was a couple more, but it wasn't even a world I was in. And so I really was just like, and again, I still approach my work this way. Like, if I can convince somebody to give me enough money to make the thing, that's the thing. That's it. Like, that's what you're going for. Mm-hmm. And that's the goal, because the making is the goal. If the making is not the goal, I think it can be really disappointing industry. But if you focus on, if you don't get lost and you really just like, no, I want to make this. I want to talk to the people who took Richard Simmons' class. I want to go and like cut these interviews together, and I want to think about it and ask questions, and like, then it's great. Then it's amazing.
Were there sort of creative challenges you faced in making Missing Richard Simmons, especially since it was sort of your first audio experiment? Did you find that there were certain aspects to that process that were more challenging than you anticipated?
You know, I had done radio in college, and so I had already gotten over the idea of what my voice sounded like. I wasn't very good. I wasn't very good in college. I mean, I was good. I was good at what I did. I was like the news director at the radio station at Cornell, but like, you know, but my voice didn't sound good. It wasn't like people listened to me and like, oh my God, this guy's going to be huge. Like, that's not what was going on. But it was helpful that I didn't have that stumbling block as much. And that was really helpful, to just not have that sort of weird shame and like embarrassment that I sound so stupid, because everybody just sounds what they sound like. Yeah. The other thing is that we made a conscious choice at the very beginning with my producer, Henry Malofsky, to embrace the ways that I wasn't doing it like other people were doing it, instead of reacting to it. Like, I interrupt people a lot. Like, I laugh a lot. Like, as I'm talking to you, I laugh when I'm surprised. Yeah. I'll just say, like, one day I'm going to do a supercut from all my shows of all the times I say, wow, like during a conversation that completely interrupts somebody's train of thought. but like, that was just what I was doing. I wasn't waiting for clean tape. I wanted to have a conversation. And instead of being like, well, this isn't how it's done, Dan, we were just like, well, let's see if we can figure out how that works. And so it really helped me lean on my personality instead of like trying to be something that I wasn't. And that was like that felt important when we were doing it. And I'm still super grateful for that.
Well, and all of your work has such a deep thread of empathy and humanity and connection. And I think that's so important, especially for digital products that, or projects rather, that, many people won't have the chance to meet you or see you or be in sharing space with you, but you're able to build such a trust with your audience. I'm curious, how you've been able to do this type of narrative nonfiction that leads with empathy. Why is that so important to you? And how do you bring that in show after show?
I think that's what I'm not trying to be nice. I think that's what I'm most interested in, is like when you talk to people. It's funny, you get this opportunity. You can talk to anybody you want to. If they say they'll talk to you, they'll talk to you. And you go and you sit down for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you can ask them anything you want. And like, that's the craziest thing. And you realize how powerful that is. But if you waste all that time trying to be confrontational, if you waste all that time trying to make people say something they didn't want, if you spend that time sort of judging somebody or like pushing a political argument and I have strong politics, but like in my work, I try not to, because I want to talk to the person.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to make an argument. I feel like the more you're making an argument, the more you're making a real sort of political argument, farther I feel away from the truth. And so I just want to to me, that was just the most fun, most interesting thing to have people just say what they were feeling. And that if you let your guard down, they will too. And then you actually are just like connecting with another person. And so I want to express that in the thing. And that's the whole fun of the job. Yeah.
Well, and I think to, your credit, a way that audio has been such an amazing space to sort of express yourself, because you can, allow these really intimate conversations to play out that sometimes with all the camera, you're not able to have that same experience.
Yeah, for sure. Audio is it's much less intrusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you won a Webby Award for Richard Simmons. It clearly struck a chord with audiences worldwide and certainly with our Academy. As your first show, as something that sort of got that recognition, I mean, how did something like a Webby, how did all of this influence your career, potentially allow you to then move forward and build a career out of this?
The only thing for me, for my work, what I'm trying to do, the only thing that's really important is getting funding for the next project. I think about it like a film director. And so when you win things like a Webby or you get some sort of recognition, even if you're like embarrassed about it, you're like, I don't really deserve it, or like, who cares, or it's not an Oscar or whatever, like it matters. It gives people a reason to think that, oh, maybe his next one will work too, because this one worked. And they said it worked because he got an award. That sort of thing really has helped me. And I don't I don't work for awards or anything, but it's like, it's important. It's part of getting the next project funded. And I'm just like forever focused on that.
Yeah. Well, and has that process allowed you, with every show, how easier or more challenging has it become to find your next project or to find the funding for your next project?
It's always hard to find the next project. I mean, it's not really finding, it's sort of like developing into a place where you're confident enough that you can go out and pitch it and be like, I can make this.
Yeah.
As opposed to like going out and pitching like 10 stories and be like, which one do you like? And then they sort of pick one and they're like, maybe if you develop that, we'll read it. And then, okay, well, and it's just like this long, endless process. Don't do that. This is my advice. Take it or leave it. Do not just go in and like, don't pitch until you know you want to make it, because people can smell that shit. People can smell it on you that you are just like, that you've got something cooking inside your head, and that's so much easier to jump on board with and collaborate with and make real. If people can see the sort of excitement and the depth of interest and knowledge already, like when I go and pitch a story, I've already read like 3 books on the subject, or like, you know what I mean? Like it's just part of the thing. And so it's hard still. It's still hard. But I take the time and develop shows real specifically. And then I pitch them, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
I gotta say, your batting average, Dan, is pretty spectacular. So I think they always work. I'm curious, can you maybe tell us what you can about the pitch process for Hysterical? What was that like?
Well, ask me that. I'm not sure if this is answering your question, but what you just said made me want to say this, is that I don't go into pitches thinking I can make this. I don't tell them I can make this. I go in, even though I might say that, I go in my head thinking, I'm hearing that I'm saying, I think if I put all my energy and effort into this, I think I have a really good shot of making this work. And that's how I approach the pitch, because I don't want to because then you feel, then they buy it and they're like, oh, fuck, I promised I can make it. And there's something about in my head of a promise that you can make it versus a promise that you're really going to embrace this project and like, and do it as good as you can. And like that somehow takes the pressure off me a little bit, as opposed to thinking that I'm like, I don't want that like I made this huge promise that people can't keep. What do you say? What was the question about Hysterical?
Yeah, I was just curious if you could tell us a little bit about what it was like pitching, sort of developing and pitching and selling Hysterical.
I'm trying to remember. It was, well, I have a first look deal with Pineapple Street Studios. And so when so we started developing it, we started making it together. And then as if it was going to happen. So we're just recording and trying to book it, all that stuff. And then after a few months, we go and pitch it. And so we put a pitch, we put a sizzle together with all the conversations we have, which you can do by yourself. You don't need a big company to do that. I have done that by myself. And then there's not that, I mean, there's a few places that are willing to pitch. I mean, the shows I make are expensive, relatively. And so it's not like there's like 20 places to pitch it. There's like 3. And so you go out and pitch and hope somebody likes it. Yeah. But it was not bad this time.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned there's only 3 places you can bring it to. I'm curious, has the evolving and contracting sort of podcasting network landscape changed your approach to making shows, or changed your sort of, just changed the way that you have thought about pitching these types of shows or making these types of shows?
I mean, I just think, and there are ways to look at this as a negative, but I think embracing it as a positive is probably the better way to go, is that you're not going to have the same job at the same company that you got when you were 22 when you retire at 65. It's just not that world anymore. You're probably not going to have the same job for 5 years. And the thing you're doing in 20 years won't even have been invented yet. And so I think really not entering podcasting or film or TV or anything as if like this is going to be my life now. I think you need to, it's not, because it's not. I think you need to take it, be really present for like, what am I making now and why is it right for this, as opposed to like building a production company where I have this whole life in audio, and like, because that's harder to do, and that's a business person's job, and I'm not a business person. Like for me, I'm a creative person. I just want to be fluid enough where I can get the projects I want made, period. And if people, at some point, people don't want podcasts anymore, like I wouldn't continue to make them unless I had a really great one. And then I might make it anyway. And those things like that can be really special. So I think it's just fluidity, and things are really uncertain, but I think embracing uncertainty in life now is the only way to go. And I think that there's a real positive way to do that. And it really feels good when you're just like, yeah, no, I get it.
Yeah.
Like things are crazy, but like when you get ahead of that, instead of like always reacting to it and be like, no, I get that podcasting might not be here in 5 years. I get it. But like it could go for 100 years and like, or something even better could come and replace it. Or maybe there'll be some sort of distribution method that they figure out where podcasts all of a sudden become way easier for somebody like me to release. And like all of a sudden there's like a flood. So, I mean, it's a really dynamic process. And I think setting yourself up to be ready for that instead of planning on one career for the rest of your life is probably the way to go.
Well, and you are working on a couple of shows at once. You know, you are very dedicated to a project, but I know that you also sort of start development and think about other stuff. I mean, do you feel like that's an important sort of element to a podcaster's work? You know, the idea of sort of balancing a couple of different ideas or projects, sort of having a slate.
It's hard. It's hard. At least it's hard for me. Some people I think have a little more facility with that. I tend to be a very linear person, where I'm making this project, then I'm done, and then I'll take a week off, and then I'll be like, okay, what am I making next? Which is the dumbest way to do it. I've gotten better, and so now I usually have a few things cooking at once. I'm basically making two things right now. I'm at the early stages of one and the middle stage of another. And that's a good system.
Yeah.
But definitely you have to have a slate, I guess you would call it.
And people, you know, I think really respond to your work in all different forms and shapes and sizes. Do you find that your work is impacted by listener feedback or sort of how people feel about the shows that you make? I think I know the answer to this, but I'm curious.
I don't read listener feedback. I don't read a lot of listener feedback. Like on the Apple, like I like real basic stuff, like just like it's great or it's not great, or like I tend to avoid that because it can really knock you down.
Yeah.
Because people sort of jump out with mean things. What did you think the answer was?
I thought you were going to say no. I mean, I think that you have such a singular voice and a vision, and I think that you have always been sort of catapulted by your vision. And I think that's what makes your shows so special, because you do drive, you do sort of make the show you want to make. And I think that is felt so deeply by your audience.
Thank you. I would say, I also want to add to that. I've developed a really incredible core group of collaborators, which is the most important thing. Like their feedback really makes a difference to me. And this is a long running sort of 7-8 year conversation that we've been having about how do you do this? And like, and so, so in terms of like building a career and like leaning on collaborators, it's the joy of it, but also that's where you're going to learn everything. And that's how you make stuff when nobody has any money. Then you just all kind of make it together, and like it's just like making it with other people and learning from them is a really important part of the process.
Totally. And shout out to Henry. You know, shout out to so many of your collaborators.
Yeah.
Because it's a collaborative medium in so many ways. And how big generally is the teams or small are the teams that you work with?
They can go up and down depending on where the podcasting was at the time. Like people were sort of trying different things and stuff, but basically it's a producer, an associate producer, especially a producer, an executive producer, an editor. And then, like 5 or 6 people, but also like backed up by Pineapple Street. So they have, an attorney and like they have rights clearances and like stuff like that. Like, so I tend to like a small team. I find bigger teams get to be a drag.
Yeah. I also think that you have the spirit, you are an independent maker. Like you have made things on your own and sort of come from that background. But I think collaboration is really important. Another question, and we're getting so many great questions in the chat, but I have maybe 1 or 2 more, and then I'd love to open it up to everyone. And again, if other people have more questions, please put them in the chat. I'm seeing already so many, and I want to make sure we can get to as many as we can. How do you stand out in today's crowded landscape? There's so many podcasts. Certainly, I think you have a brand now, and so you sort of operate of people know sort of the type of work that you make. But whether it's your own work or just your colleagues, your friends who are making podcasts, do you think that there's something a special sauce to stand out in sort of a hyper-saturated audio market?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly think it's giving good long thought, like as not just like as like part of setting yourself up for a lifetime of work, giving good long thought to what your voice is and what you want it to be. And if you find yourself trying to sell a show, I mean, a lot of people just sell shows that are just sort of like other versions of the ones that have been out before, right? And that is a business model. It's not as much fun for me.
Yeah.
And so originality, I think helps people stand out. But I would also say originality, like I also think my taste is relatively commercial. Like it's not like I want like, you know, John Cage, like 4 minutes of silence or anything like that, because that's what I want personally. I think I ended up developing through my life, through all the things I was interested in, just sort of I don't think I have a very strange point of view. I think it's probably pretty, because it's supposed to be entertaining. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be good. It's supposed to be compelling. So figuring out how to do that, instead of repeating what the last people have been doing, is usually it's hard to get there. It's hard to, because people don't necessarily want to trust you with something new, but it's a good thing to try to endeavor towards.
Yeah. Well, and you've talked quite a bit, and I think this is always a question that a lot of makers are wondering is, you know, how do you create career sustainability, you know, especially in audio? And I think we're probably all figuring that out, but do you have any tips on sort of how podcasters can balance a career in this with creativity, with creative freedom, but also, you know, by being sustainable and being an audio maker? You know, what has worked for you, or what are you still trying to endeavor around?
You know, I worry about saying this, but like, I think it's part of what what has been helpful about my approach. I never thought I would get rich off making stuff. I never, like, I just didn't, it just off of making like TV or film, or like, it just wasn't, I just didn't think it just wasn't what I expected to happen. And so I don't have a lot of huge disappointment when it doesn't. I think it's project by project. I think it's going forward in a really deliberate way, and and feeling really good about what you're doing, and feeling really good about what the next thing is doing, and then staying, not leaving. Like, I'm 51, and I started working in television with a lot of people who aren't doing it anymore. And a lot of it is just like, a lot of it's just is being the last one in the room. Like, and because if you stay, then you end up knowing a bunch of people and you have perspective. All of a sudden it happens like you don't even see it coming. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have perspective. I've been doing this for 30 years. Like, I kind of get, and it gives you a certain kind of confidence and humility, because you know that a lot of things don't work, but it just sort of gives you confidence that, that you can make good stuff, but that only comes with time. And so unfortunately it's a time thing. I will also say that I think looking at audio work and documentary work, outside of an economic benefit model in your own head, is a good way to do it. And I don't say this half-assedly. Like, it really is a lifestyle choice. Like, my desk is like surrounded by books on the things I'm interested in, and I get to call people and talk to them, and I get to work with really interesting people making interesting things. And so even the things that don't feed me monetarily, they create a really nice life where you're like interested and curious, and you're learning things, and you're like looking out and like seeing it and like figuring things out. And like, it just, I think it's not a lot of money. It's not money, but like, it's valuable.
Yeah. What beautiful sort of like thoughts for creators, whether emerging or established. You know, I think this idea of originality, this idea of keep going, this idea of, you know, believing in your work and working with collaborators. I hope those of you joining us today are sort of absorbing some of that Dan, I would love to now move on to some brilliant questions we have from the audience.
Great.
So, I guess one thing I'll start with is, many creators are struggling with finding an audience after they invest energy into creating a podcast. Do you have any advice into how to promote a podcast successfully in 2025?
I don't. I'm not very good at that because and it's not where my advice is super helpful in terms of how to promote in 2025. Because right now because I've been doing this for a while, that like marketing is really helpful for me. Like I have, if you're making it for a larger company, they'll put it in front of people. But I will say very often you don't find it, even if it's great, you don't find an audience. I will say this is going to be not unpopular, but it's probably stupid. For me, it's never worked that like, you're not just the director, you're not just a creator, you're not just the host, you're also the marketing person, you're also the business person, you're also the, like, I kind of don't know that works. You're also the social media manager, you're also the type of work that stuff is just at a different place in your brain than the type of creative work that you need to be doing in order to be at the center of a podcast, or if not working on film or a podcast, but like at the center of a film or a podcast, and you're going to be the one pushing it forward. You're going to be the bulldozer. I feel like that requires focus on that, and the rest I've always counted on collaborators with to finding people who know how to do it better than I do, and having them give me advice. And very often it's just like a phone call or someone you meet at some, I've met, like one of my closest collaborators, Diane Hodson, like I met at some documentary club in Brooklyn like 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was totally random. And like we worked together. I was able to pay her like a little bit to help me on Missing Richard Simmons. And then she became the producer, and then she's become producer of everything. And now she's an editor. Like, she's amazing. And so why did I start talking about Diane Hodson?
Collaborators, sort of people to help you fill in the gaps.
Other people. I guess my answer is, if you think the answer to all that stuff is in your own head, it's not. Other people have the answer. And working in groups and spending time with people, going to festivals, all the things that feel like you're wasting your time, the things that this feels a little too fun to be worthwhile. I need to be sitting at my desk. Like, all that stuff that's how you get collaborators and insight. And so I would say focus on that stuff. Yeah. Other people know how to do it better than you do.
Here's another one. You often use unanswered questions as the impetus for your shows, and it's really powerful for listeners. Is it ever helpful to think you know the answer, especially in the pitching process? And maybe just curious to hear a little bit more about how you whether it's Hysterical or whether it's Simmons or the others, like, that is an interesting part of your hypothesis sometimes. How does that sort of play into the pitching or the development of a show?
I mean, it used to be hard because it's hard because you go in and you convince people, you make this show, I don't know how it's going to end. And that's a really, but I think, I mean, to be fair, I mean, the fact that we made Missing Richard Simmons, which is a show that didn't have, not only it had a question, but we didn't answer it. Mm-hmm. And it was still really good. And I'm proud to say that. I think that's a really important. I don't think people want answers. I think that's, people don't want answers. I mean, because it's too far away from the truth. If you just say, oh, here's the answer, we know what happened, it's not. If it's really complicated and it's like, here's the answer, but also don't forget this, but also here's another person, remember what she said. And then when you put it in the context of, it's not simple. There is no simple answer. And so I think what makes podcasting so interesting is that it's a way to answer one question. If I make 6-episode podcasts, it's almost a way to answer one question 6 times. Mm-hmm. And that every time you're building on the answer you did on the one before. And so by the time you get to the end, I think there's a richness of it that feels like an answer, or that is as satisfying as the answer. Yeah. So that's how I've always approached it.
Well, and I think this ties really nicely to another question we had. The person said, your stories are so beautifully constructed, which I agree. The Jello motif and payoff in Hysterical was delightful. Mm. Can you talk about your approach to narrative structure? I think you were just sort of talking a little bit about it, but when do you decide on openings and endings in particular? Maybe how are you thinking about the structure of these projects?
Well, I'll answer that in just with the Jello thing. Is that the Jello thing? We weren't sure it was going to pay out. We kept talking about Jello, and we also kept talking about the town in this podcast is called Leroy, but some people call it Leroy. And so like half the podcast was about what do we call this town? And it was sort of stupid, but it was making us laugh every time. I would interview. Everybody had a great different answer for why for about Jello or the town, and I didn't know where they were going to go, and I didn't know how it was going to fit in. The Jello thing, we didn't know why it meant something, but it did. And it wasn't until towards the end where we found a way how to come back to it, and why it meant something. And so I would say I take structure. Structure is writing. It's the whole thing. I think I take it. I think I take it. I'm able to hold it lightly.
Yeah.
I'm able to, and that also requires a lot of negotiating with the people you're making it with, especially if you're making it for like a company that they, they're like, don't worry about it, everybody, like hippy dippy, like we'll get there, but like we really will. And so anyway, yeah, structure is the most important thing. It's the most important thing.
Yeah. Well, another question we had was, and I think this is tied in as well, have you changed your interviewing approach and style from project to project? I imagine every project requires something different, but any strategies you stumbled on that have gotten you really fantastic tape?
The thing that gets me, if there's good tape, the thing that gets me good tape, I will say this. This works for me. I'm not trying to get the person that I'm talking to say something. What I'm trying to do, I like to approach every interview. I mean, some are so small and whatever that you just like, let's just do it. Like I'm a person, but like in general, when I'm doing an interview, I approach it as though I'm trying to show them a good time too. That they've said that they're going to answer anything I want, and they probably don't even want to do this. Like nobody wants to do this. So they sit down and like, I want to show them like, it's okay. And like, this can be fun. And like, we can actually get somewhere. I know we're talking about this thing that happened to you 10 years ago, but like, while we're here, I had these questions about it. When's the last time somebody asked you questions about this? And what does that make you think? And so building with the person where they say something, you're like, oh, really? Well, that makes me think. And they say, oh yeah, well, actually, here's a funny thing. And I think capturing that process of back and forth, not just back and forth, like, aren't we being funny or repartee, but back and forth getting somewhere is really satisfying to hear. And so I do look at interviews that way. It's not about getting them to say something. It's about making it valuable for both of us.
Yeah. We have a couple more questions. And again, if anyone has any additionals, please feel to put them in the chat. This is interesting. I'm curious for your thoughts here, Dan, but someone asked about video podcasting and sort of the popularity of the video podcast rising. But, as a podcast relies on remote guests and webcams, is it helpful ever to publish the footage, or would it just hurt? Have you ever thought about sort of video playing into your work?
I've thought about it. I mean, the obvious thing is that you make a podcast and then you put video on it, it's a documentary. But besides that irony, I've thought about it. I just don't know how. I'm not going to do it just because everybody keeps saying, because at the end of the year, every sort of year-end list was like video podcast. That's what's happening. Video podcast. Everyone has to have video podcast. And you start freaking out. They're like, how do I make mine a video podcast? I don't shoot video when I'm doing the conversation, when I'm having the conversation. I think not being on camera helps people be more open and feel less constrained and just a little freer. So I don't see a lot of positives for using video. I do think there's potentially a world where you make an audio documentary, you make a podcast, and then you release it on YouTube with some sort of visual component, but not that you shot. It would be more of a sort of like vibey thing.
Yeah.
So that you can sort of listen to it and kind of look at it and listen to it and maybe see a picture of who you're talking about, but not see them during the interview, and like just suggest images as opposed to seeing exactly what you're hearing. I think there might be something useful to that.
Yeah. A lot of people questions this. I think might just be helpful to hear your perspective of, who are those top podcast companies that you're pitching, or who do you feel like are the people in the market that, are viable? And do you need an agent in order to make this happen?
Well, I mean, so basically like Apple and Wondery and Audible, like those are people who would pay, who would sort of have the money, who would be interested in sort of paying, even though money's still an issue everywhere. I mean, they will come a little closer to what I need. But there are a lot of podcast companies out there, Campside, Lemonada, Pineapple Street Studios, which I work with, which will take pitches easier. I mean, you can't send a brand. Do you need an agent? I don't know that you need an agent, because very often what happens is that when you finally have something that somebody wants to buy, they'll set you up with an agent, and then that's that. It helps to have agents set up the thing. You kind of usually need some sort of introduction to a person, but it's not that. I mean, it's not that hard to get, especially if you go to audio festivals, do things socially, go to like meetups, like meet people that are working in your industry and doing other things in your industry. And you will find people who will introduce you to companies that can help you get your things made.
Yeah. Final question I have for you, Dan. What have been some of your favorite shows from the past year?
Oh my God.
Just put you in the spot. I know you're in your own, you're
totally blanking. I'm totally
come back to it. You want to? Yeah, I'll come back. We'll come back to it.
What's the last question? How are we going to come back to it? It's the last question.
Well, no, I can do one more. This is actually another question.
Okay, do one more. Pass.
I'll do another. Obviously, your favorite show is Hysterical. Let's be real. Apple Podcast 2024 show of the year. Yeah. Someone, I think had a really interesting thought about sort of the idea of working on multiple projects and sort of balancing that. They mentioned they released an independent series a few months ago, and they're now searching for their new project. They want to be the type of podcaster you talked about who juggles multiple projects at once. What are some practices you found helpful in switching from all my energy into one project to having multiple projects? Really interesting question. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I just think that there's a difference between one project and multiple. Three, maybe, like that you're really approaching at the same time, for me is enough. Because I do the one thing I can do as the person at the center of the podcast that you're pitching is that I can commit my time and my energy and my passion to it. And I don't think you can do that with 10 shows. I just don't think you can. And so, and the sort of the attention I give it is part of the value. And so when I say multiple projects, I mean 2 or 3. Yeah. And in terms, but I mean that, I'm not doing like talk podcasts, or like, I'm not doing the podcasts that we're making are much more time intensive to put together. If I were doing podcasts that were a little looser and that could come out at a quicker cadence, I might have a different policy. But for me, it's even multiple projects is just a couple that you really believe in, and that you can talk about with other people, and but couple that you really believe in.
Well, Dan, I know we have limited time. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing just the best and most valuable insights. Thank you. It's a pleasure to hear from you.
So much fun, man. So good to see you.
So good to see you. And everyone, there's so many great still questions in the chat. We'll do more of these. Like I mentioned, Webby Sessions is sort of an ongoing series that we're putting together. Dan, we'd love to have you back, of course. Anytime. So much happening. But to everyone tuning in, again, a reminder out there, if you're making great work in audio, don't forget to apply and submit your work to the Webby Awards. Our extended entry deadline is next Friday, February 7th. You heard the man. Webby's awards can be so meaningful and important to the work that you do. So we'd love to review your work. Again, we'll drop that link in the chat, but you can submit at webbyawards.com. Thank you again. A huge thanks to Dan. And we'll see you all at the next Webby session. And until then, see you on the internet.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Dan.